All right. Okay, well, I'm here with Simon from the Uneducated Economist YouTube channel. And I'm going to just ask him a bunch of questions, find out about him, see what's going on. We may have a little screaming match over the Fed because I don't know if we're eye to eye on that. So you may want to make sure and stay, till deeper into the podcast to get that. The other thing is be sure and hit the subscribe button and the like button if you like this content. Be sure and leave me any kind of comments that will help me, either guest suggestions or anything that could be useful, or any questions you want the answers to. So, well, anyway, let's get started. So, were you born and raised in Astoria, Oregon? Is that correct, or at least in that area, or what?
Well, I was pretty much raised here, but no, I was born, my dad was in the Coast Guard military, so we traveled around quite a bit. I was born in Northern California, Eureka area. But then we traveled quite a bit, like every 4 years we would move. And then when he retired, we retired up here in the Astoria area. And so I moved here when I was like 12, and I've been here ever since.
Okay. And so what was it like growing up, either bouncing around like that and then finally settling in Astoria?
It was a little bit of a bummer being, because you never really, like, you establish these friendships and then you have to leave them all behind. And so right about the time that you're really becoming good friends, you got to leave them all and then start over again. So that was a little bit of a bummer. But, like I said, he retired when I was like 12. So I moved to a little town just outside of Astoria, went to a little high school out there. So it was a nice, tight little community. And I enjoyed growing up out there, finishing high school and stuff out there.
Now, in your area, are most of the people generations there, or is it a place where people are coming in all the time, moving out? So, like, I mean, do you still have, a group of folks that maybe you went to high school with, or junior high, that still spend time with, or something like that? Or is it more where everybody's gone? And how is it in that part of the country?
Yeah, I would say the area here is pretty old. So there's a lot of old families, a lot of generations of people who stick around here. Astoria was founded back in the 1800s. So it was like the early 1800s. John Jacob Astor founded as a fur trading post. And so there's been a lot of logging money, fishing money, a lot of old school kind of, family kind of money like that. And as far as the people themselves, like, I had 32 people in my graduating class. I mean, not a whole lot. And I see quite a few of them still, just on the daily day, at the store, coming into where I work and stuff like that. So I would say, quite a few of my friends have moved away, but I think people do stick it out here. It's a nice community and it's clean and it's friendly. So it's a good place to be.
And so, so Simon, what's your story? What got you going? How did you get to where you're at right now?
Yeah, pretty interesting. Failure does it. That's pretty much what happened. I tried to buy a house in 2007. I was working construction at the time, making fairly decent money. So, everybody said, hey, you got to buy a house because you're having this kid. And so that's what I did. I went and signed a deal on a house, and I kid you not, it was like 2 months later, there was a housing market crash and I lost my job and everything started going downhill. So it became very difficult on me, and I'm trying to figure out what's going on. Why am I not able to pay my bills? Why did I lose my job? What's going on? So I'm hitting the computer and I'm trying to figure things out. And a friend of mine actually came to me and he said, hey, it sounds like you're pretty interested in this stuff. I'm going to give you a book. It's called The Creature from Jekyll Island, written by G.R. Griffin. And so he hands me this book, and I kid you not, the thing is like this thick, right? And I'm like, bro, I don't read. I barely graduated high school. Like, I can read, but I don't read books. I'm not going to get through this book. And he said, well, try, right? Just dive into it a little ways. I think you'll like it. And so he was right. It took me about 6 months, but I did get through that book. And man, was that an eye opener. After that, I just started asking a lot of questions and just kept going to the computer every day. I would spend 2, 3, 4 hours a day listening to videos or reading articles, reading Fed speeches. And I just never stopped asking questions, and I never stopped trying. And I do this pretty much ever since then. I will put 2 or 3 hours of research in just about every single day.
So when did you read The Creature from Jekyll Island?
I would say that was probably in 2008, 2009, somewhere right around there.
All right, so quite a while of that.
Yeah.
And so you said you barely got through high school, so you call yourself the uneducated economist. So is high school kind of the pinnacle, or have you done any other kind of educational pursuits, or is it
Nope.
all? It's just basically been researching things on your own that's gotten you here.
No, that's pretty much it. I graduated high school, went right to work at a lumber yard, was doing physical labor pretty much my whole life. I eventually worked myself into a sales position. So now I answer phones more than I load lumber, but that's kind of what I ended up doing with it. As far as the economics and stuff like that, I never took a class on it. I hardly read any books on the matter. I read The Creature from Jekyll Island, and I read Cantillon's essay on economic theory. But I listened to a lot of Peter Schiff. I listened to a lot of Doug Casey. I listened to a lot of these economists out there, Mark Faber, and I would take in as much information from every direction as I could. And if they said something I didn't understand, I would research that, and until I finally figured out what they were talking about. My whole thing was that I never denied anywhere where I was getting information, whether it came from a news source or a publication or something. I would just read it. And if I thought it was good information, I might keep some of it out of there, pull the nuggets of information out, but I never denied anything. I never said I'm not going to read this because I don't believe in it or something like that. I always felt that there was always little pieces of information in just about everything. So.
Well, I mean, you've heard the old adage, or the old question: what's the difference between an economist and a weatherman?
What's that?
Yeah, every once in a while, the weatherman's right.
That's right. That's about the truth of it too.
It holds true over time, unfortunately, but that's
Yeah.
true. So now,
I think about it. All these economists, they compile all this information, they put all these numbers together, they come up with their theories, and most of them are about 51% right anyway.
yeah, that's true. So what got you started on YouTube? What was it that made you say, "Hey, I'm going to just, start looking into my phone and recording"?
It was pretty interesting. So when I started the YouTube channel, I was still pretty broke. Like I was probably $20,000 in debt, driving broken down cars, just didn't have much going on. But I was studying a lot of the economy, and I would babble on about it to my friends or coworkers and stuff. And one day I'm at work and I'm sitting at my desk and I'm going off about taper tantrum or something. I don't know what I was talking about. And I just remember this girl, Brittany, that I worked with, and she was kind of like this tall blonde girl. She ride horses and stuff. So she's kind of farm girl. And, she comes up and she puts her fist on my desk and she looks at me and she says, "Hey, listen, bro, you're going to have to start a YouTube channel or a blog or something. Okay. Because nobody here understands what you're talking about and you are driving us crazy." And I went, "Oh, okay, Brittany, you're right." Okay. So I grabbed my phone, which was a used iPhone 6 that I bought for $100. I went down to my car. I fired it up. I did an introductory video to the Uneducated Economist. I used the Works Wi-Fi to upload that video, and I just kept posting videos.
And how long ago was that? When did you start?
That was November of 2017.
Okay, so not that long ago, about 5 years.
Oh, really? Not that long ago, no.
Okay, and so how many subscribers do you have right now? Roughly.
I'm right around 104,000 subscribers now,
Oh man,
which just blows me away. I never thought this channel would ever have 104 subscribers, let alone 104,000. So, yeah, it's quite the experience, all this taking place. Yeah.
So now, what's the best YouTube channel that you watch, or maybe one of your favorites, or something like that you?
Yeah. I go through phases on my YouTubers. So if it's like economics, there's a few guys that I really like to listen to out there that are on my list. And I don't really I don't hold these these channels like at the very top of the list. Like I will listen to everybody or anybody, but I like listening to Matt Monaco 64. I think he does a great job on his YouTube channels as far as economics go. I like Boom Bear Bubble Bust. He does a great job on his stuff too. I think that's great. These are kind of small time YouTubers. If you're getting into some of the bigger guys, I really love George Gammon. I think he did a wonderful job getting his stuff up and started with those whiteboard videos. If you look at some of his earlier stuff, he was doing real estate videos, and they just really weren't that, I wouldn't say they weren't that great, but they weren't that like attractive or interesting. When he started doing the whiteboard videos, man, I was just like, I thought those were great. So I like those. But then really, I like some of the other, like maybe not into the economics. Like I really like Mind Smash, especially some of the videos that he was putting out a couple of years ago. Mind Smash does a great job with a lot of like self-awareness, you know, living a more conscious life kind of stuff. And he based all his stuff around like fighting and MMA stuff. So it's really intriguing, some of his videos that he has, his life philosophy stuff. So I really like Mind Smash as well. So those are just a few of them that I watched recently.
Okay. So now what's maybe the worst YouTube video you've ever seen?
That I've ever seen?
Yeah. Well, watch something that shows you now that one right there should have never been shot or whatever. I don't know, man. Pretty open question, but sometimes I mean, we ask these crazy things like that. Sometimes you get some really interesting answers. So
yeah. I don't know. I never really, I guess I hadn't really thought about like the worst video that I've seen out there as far as that goes. You know, I know there's some I mean, I hate to put it this way because maybe I just don't understand the theory behind it a lot, but I know there's a lot of like both the feminism and then the Magato thing. Like I watched a few of these people kind of combat back and forth, and I thought, man, what a waste of time this is happening here. You know, don't you guys have a little bit better understanding of connection and being in a little bit more meaningful and magnetic personalities? Like, I mean, have you guys thought about this kind of stuff? But anyway, I watched that kind of stuff go on, and I'm thinking, man, this is kind of worthless videos here. But then again, I mean, who am I to judge that, you know?
yeah, for me, it's like anything that the mainstream media produces. It's probably the worst that I've seen.
Yeah. I like using the mainstream media stuff against them. So, I like watching those things and getting the information and then saying, hey, look how like foolish this is, or how like doesn't make sense or something like that. So I like using the mainstream against them. But yeah, I kind of agree. Like as far as economics based stuff, I wouldn't follow the mainstream for information. They're terrible at it.
Well, to me, it helps to understand what their focus is, right? And so who they're supporting. And so if you look at it thinking you're going to get an unbiased opinion on either Fox or on SNBC, then you're missing the boat. But what you want to do is you want to know what that segment of the establishment is wanting to propagate to me. Right. And that's what comes out there, right? So, that's what's important for them. That's what they want us or the people that aren't paying attention to think or move or feel or whatever it might be. And to that degree, is kind of, the thing that I like about them, I guess. At least you can get a feel for what that is. But so now let's get into the Jekyll Island. I'm sure that's what has kind of focused a bunch of your opinions on the Fed. So give me your breakdown on the Fed and what you and I've read Jekyll Island, but it's been a number of years ago. But I kind of have I don't have the intricacies, but I have the gist.
Yeah. Well, the Federal Reserve, I mean, as far as just like being the central bank, if you kind of look at them as not an evil organization that a lot of people want to kind of put that label on them, and just look at them as a group of men who are trying to do business, and then try and wrap your head around how monetary policy is supposed to work, and then think about what these people would do to try and establish their monetary policies to make them go forward. Now, a lot of people just like to point their finger at the Fed and say that they're the reasons why everything is wrong in the world. And I mean, that's cool, but I try not to point blame at anything. Like, I mean, it's easy to blame stuff and say that's the reason why I have all these problems. But then there's another thing to take responsibility for yourself and to understand the conditions that you're in and try to deal with those conditions to the best of your ability. And that's really where I think following the Federal Reserve and try not to, I mean, me personally, I try not to look at them as an evil intent, but more as just trying to conduct their monetary policies and in a way that, how can I say this? Like, I can't imagine that a group of people would make decisions that would absolutely destroy themselves. And that's what a lot of people seem to think is coming from the Federal Reserve, that they are going to destroy themselves, right? And I just don't see that taking place. I think that they put out a narrative, they allow people to believe things that are for their benefit, and they just don't correct them, right? And they use that. A lot of that is mainly inflation expectations. And that's really where I think the Federal Reserve is their main job right now, is to try and create expectations or to create that credible threat, to give the people this expectations that they know what's going to be happening so that the Federal Reserve can really conduct their monetary policies. And I know this is kind of confusing in the way it sounds, but really it comes down to jawboning, that forward guidance, or what I like to use is credible threats, or the term credible threats. And just their words alone is enough to move the markets. And so they use that credible threat in a very secretive fashion that a lot of people are just not aware of or don't really take into consideration because they don't, not even realizing that it's happening, you know? So, you know, when it comes to the Federal Reserve, I try to focus in on the monetary policy and what I feel that they are trying to conduct with that, and what it is that they need to do with their interest rates and the Fed funds rate in order to achieve those monetary policies. That's left up to interpretation. I mean, a lot of people, you know, say one thing when I might say another, you know, and it's hard to figure out what it is that the Federal Reserve is actually going to do. You know, when you're looking at a 2% inflation target, as opposed to a 2% average inflation over time, those are two different things, right? And so if the Federal Reserve is trying to place their interest rates so that they can get the inflation down to that 2% target, and people are taking that strategy on, that's the incorrect strategy. It's not a 2% target. They're going for a 2% over time, and we don't know exactly what that means. So as people are saying that the Federal Reserve is keeping the interest rates elevated and is going to cause pain and damage, and they don't need to keep it this high because the inflation is going to come back down to the 2%, they're missing it. They're not going for that 2% target. They're going for the average over time. And so these are the things that I try to do to try and understand what monetary policy is going to be, to see what the Federal Reserve is truly trying to do here.
Yeah. And so what do you think about the system itself, the central bank system? I mean, because I mean, that's the point that Griffins makes in the decline. Hey, this isn't the way to do it. There's a better way, and he spells out. I think it's a gold or commodity based system. I don't think he's, you know, ultra specific, but
now. Okay, so there's a couple of things that go on there. First of all, like the idea of a central bank system, okay? The central bank system is supposed to be an elastic money supply. So as the economy starts to open up and get moving, and there's more transactions, there's more businesses and more things happening there, in order to make sure that there's enough currency in the system, you have to have this elastic money supply. That's where the Federal Reserve was going to step in. If you only have a gold-based currency, you can only have so much money in there. But if you have this fiat currency, well, then the Federal Reserve can step in during these times of expansion, and with an elastic money supply, begin to add currency so that there is enough currency to make all these transactions and things happen, right? To keep the economy moving.
Yeah.
Right, add liquidity. When things slow down, the Federal Reserve was going to pull that liquidity back out, right? This is the elastic money supply to deal with the business cycles that take place. Great idea, right? I mean, now I'm not saying it's one that we should do. I'm just saying that the idea behind it is a wonderful concept. Okay, so just the thought of it. Unfortunately, there is no way that the powers that be do not corrupt into that system. So now what we end up having is that we have a system that when things slow down, the Fed tries to inject money into it. And when things heat up, they try to pull it back out, completely opposite of what they were intended on doing. So do I think the Federal Reserve is doing a good job? Absolutely not. Like, yeah, I mean, they're not doing a great job at all. But really, what we have as far as a Federal Reserve banking system, the central banking system, and having the access to provide the world with a currency, that world reserve currency, gives us a way of life unlike anybody else in the entire world. And the idea that we would just get rid of the Federal Reserve altogether and lose that world reserve currency status, I don't think enough people in this country are prepared to deal with that sort of lifestyle. Now, me personally, I've thought about it. I believe in competing currencies. I think we could use gold and silver. I think we could use cryptocurrencies. I think we could use a lot of different ways of making transactions happening, right? We don't necessarily have to have a fiat currency system. Unfortunately for the people here is that they have based their entire life off this fiat currency system, and transitioning into something else is not something that's just going to be an easy way to go about it. So ultimately, if you're going to get rid of this fiat currency system, you'd have to have a crash. You'd have to have it just completely fail. And I don't look forward to that.
Yeah, clearly that's not going to be pleasant. And
No, not at all.
and I mean, personally, I don't see a system that could build out of that that would not have it will anytime things like that happen, what people typically do is try to just make sure whatever those issues were never happen, thus cause almost the opposite issues, right? I mean, some
Right.
degree that's kind of how we got here. With it, they were solving liquidity issues early on, and then now here we are, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, and then it just perpetuates. So it's kind of interesting. How do you feel about the world economy and this reserve currency? Russia and China already made some direct deals, some other places. I mean, the Saudis, I mean, I don't know how bold that is, but the Saudis even floated a little bubble like, hey, we might sell oil and something besides dollars. I mean,
Yeah.
and they did not get invaded the next day, which is
Yeah, I know, right?
also unusual, right? Because I mean,
Super
Gaddafi just
unusual.
talks about an African currency and he's dead.
Right.
So, I mean, what
Yeah.
do you think's going on with it? What's your feelings?
I mean, in the end, the dollar will lose its world reserve currency status. I mean, there will come a time when it will fail to provide the world with that status. Okay. Um, I don't see that happening quickly. Like a lot of people think it's like I mean, once it does go, it's probably going to happen quickly. But from this point, I don't see that event taking place in a quick timeline. I think that's probably going to be many years down the road. You can already see that they are establishing the new ways, right? The BRICS nations are coming up with a competitive way of doing the communications to go against, like, say, the SWIFT.
Mm-hmm.
I do believe that those things are probably going to grow over time. The only issue that I have at this point right now is that even if you took all those transactions and everything that's going on around the globe as far as deals that are outside of the United States, it is such an insignificant amount right now that it doesn't even remotely compare to what the dollar is doing. I mean, doesn't even come close. So it is going to happen over time, but I mean, do we prepare for that today, or do we prepare for what I feel is probably going to end up being a stronger dollar going into the future as the Federal Reserve tightens up this monetary policy? What a lot of people, I don't think, quite take into consideration when they're looking at the strong dollar from around the world is that contracts are written around the world in dollars. Like, this is China, their government, corporations in China, corporations and governments all around the world. They have written bonds, contracts that are due in dollars. They have borrowed in dollars and they come due in dollars. Now, something that I think is very interesting is not just the debts that are due in dollars creating that strong dollar, right? The demand for the dollar, but those contracts get used as if they're dollars.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something to think about. That's more liquidity that's been added to the world reserve currency out there that has nothing to do with the United States, the central bank or government, nothing, right? But yet these are dollar transactions that are taking place, and they're dollar liquidity that is not part of the United States. When that stuff starts to dry up, we have no idea how big the demand for dollars is going to grow. That is going to be short-lived. Once it happens, once that demand gets to a point where it bubbles and it pops, it's going to be over very quickly after that. How long that goes out, I don't know. Like, it could take a very long time before we actually see the dollar bubble. And what I mean by that, I mean like years, before it actually happens. But I can see something like that taking place. Alternatively to that, they could take us into a digital currency and take rates negative And if that's the case, they will be pulling cash out of the system, and we may not see that dollar bubble pop thing that I'm suspecting would happen. But we would have to move into a digital currency with a cashless society. Yeah. And that in its own is going to be a very difficult task to come up with. You know?
Well, they basically already floated that out. They've announced the various input opportunities for the central bank digital currency. I think it's coming. I think my projection, who knows, right? But is that they're going to implement it, and if you want to do business with the federal government, you're going to have to do it in their digital currency. Now, on the face of it, that makes a ton of sense, because I mean, why deal with all of the? I mean, if you're receiving a subsidy payment from the government, makes perfect sense, right? Here you have this direct account with the Fed. And you don't need to have a bank account. A lot of those folks don't have bank accounts anyway. They take their check cash and place it, or they get it on a MasterCard now. So that's not going to change much for them. Then it's going to be the farmers. Then it's going to be, if you want an SBA loan, you're going to have to both, we're going to give it to you in Fed coin, and you're going to pay us in Fed coin. And then, they'll slowly implement these things, I believe. I think it also gives them a more, if you want your tax return, any money back from your tax return, you're going to have a Fed account. That's the way we pay you, right? And I will say that it makes a lot of sense from the face of it, right? And in the the efficiency, and with some of the technology, the blockchain technology, I mean, you can go back and prove where and how, and and whatever, and you can control its. I mean, you could even control its use. So if, say, for instance, you were given a subsidy for housing, it could only be used for housing, right? I mean, or if you were given money, because a lot of times the government does give money for specific purposes. So in the farmers, for instance, right? Okay, you've got this grant from the NRCS or whatever, and it's to plow out mesquite trees or whatever. Well, they can attach to that currency then the fact that it can only be utilized that way, right? So that part makes a lot of sense. Obviously, what scares me is that people are on the other end of this that have other motives, and they're not always the purest, right? And so then they can start manipulating markets, right? So okay, the cheese producers, right? I mean, the government's already done this. I don't know how old you are, but I remember free government cheese. All old people got free government cheese. Well, now your Social Security check's just going to have an extra $20. It can only be used to buy cheese. That's all they'd have to do, right? Before, they had this logistic issue, shipping the cheese in and all of this stuff. Now it's that simple. Within a week, they can have the bureaucracy in place. And now the government is picking winners and losers, and that's what I don't like.
And you're talking about with the digital currencies, like picking out.
In any way, I mean, they do it all the time anyway. But in general, I don't like it. Then it just makes it far more efficient and far easier and more difficult, I think, for a person. And then, of course, eventually, like I said, they'll phase out the paper currency.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of, like, I can see a lot of issues that are happening within the banking industry that digital currencies is going to solve. I mean, not that I agree with it, but I can see like their dilemmas and how they're going to use it. One of those things is like money velocity, right? Trying to get people to spend their money is really difficult when you have low interest rates. And I know that seems kind of weird, because you think with low interest rates, people are willing to borrow money to go out there and spend into the economy. But it has to do with return on capital investment. And that's really where low interest rates actually slows money velocity down. Dr. Lacey Hunt really gets into this. He can break it down really good. But to kind of simply explain it, I've used like the analogy of inheriting $1 million back in the early 80s. You put that $1 million to government bonds, you buy 10-year treasuries with it, you got a 15% yield. You made $150,000 a year off your $1 million investment. That's a lot of money that you can spend into the economy. You buy houses, cars, go on vacation, all with this, capital return on capital investment that you have done. Well, up until just recently, we had 10-year down at like 1%. I mean, even now it's at 4%. So you give $1 million to a 10-year treasury and you get like what, $10,000, $40,000. That's not a lot. I mean, it's a lot of money, you know, for an individual, but it's not a lot of money considering it's $1 million investment that you used to get $150,000 for back in the early 80s. So this return on capital investment actually slows money velocity down. And if you have low interest rates like we do, trying to get the interest rates back up is very difficult. This is where the Fed is having their issues right now with it. So
Well,
if
they've
you
had
were
it
in a
for a decade or better. They've been trying.
yeah, right. I mean, they have having a hell of a time trying to get that money velocity up and moving again, because every time they drop the interest rates, they get that little shot, that stimulus that comes out there, but it's short lived, doesn't last very long. So if you can go into a digital currency where you have a time constraint, you have 30 days to spend your money.
Yeah.
You know, all of a sudden money velocity can pick up very quickly, even if you have low interest rates, because they are forcing you to spend that money.
Yeah.
So I could see where they could solve it there as well, as far as trying to just get people to just keep spending money into the economy. They can force them to do it, either spend it or lose it.
Yeah. And once again, I have, philosophical and moral objection to that, right? But
Oh, absolutely.
nonetheless, these are probably discussions that people were having 200 years ago, and so it's just there's different tools now, and we're still going. And I am somebody that believes it does ebb and flow back and forth. The pendulum does go back and forth over time. Maybe not in just one person's lifetime. You may not be able to directly see it go back and forth a lot, but over a period of time, I think it does. But what kind of system do you think would work the best? Have you given that any thought?
Yeah, I don't think a system will work, like maintain forever. Like, I don't think that's possible. I honestly think that it's the flow of money that goes into a state that eventually creates an expansion that people will then take advantage of to try and get themselves into luxuries, which will then eventually drive everybody into poverty. It's just part of the Cantillon effect. I don't think there's any way of stopping that economic cycle that takes place. I think there's ways that you can draw it out or slow it down, or maybe like kind of warp it out a little bit. But ultimately what ends up happening is that new money comes into the system. That new money that comes into the system, the people who have access to that money, they get to spend it at face value. As that money starts trickling through, the people at the end of the line, they have less access to that money. They have to pay for higher prices, even though their wages haven't gone up. This is kind of like the Cantillon effect, or the Cantillon effect, the way a lot of people say it. But really, Richard Cantillon went much deeper into it, because what he was saying is that if this continues to happen, the people who have access to that money, that first access to it, well, they don't want to spend that money on higher priced goods, even though that's what's happening to those stuff. So what they do is they start finding foreign imports. They start bringing these foreign imports to compete with the domestic manufacturing. Well, that starts hurting the people at the end of the line, because that's their jobs, the domestic manufacturing is. So now it's pushing the domestic manufacturing out as these foreign imports are coming in. And the people at the end of the line, their cost of living is going up, their standard of living is going down, they're being forced out as well. So now you have the people who have access to the money importing ever increasing amounts of foreign products to, because they want to enjoy this new money coming in, till eventually everybody down at the end of the line is gone. It's nothing but foreign production coming in, and the new money gets churned off. Everybody falls into poverty. So this is the way the cycle kind of works. I just really briefly went through it, but Cantillon explains this happening through many economies through centuries of times. I mean, he talked about this happening in China and Spain.
Oh, I think we have some audio issues. Hang on. Oh, can you hear me? Hello? I think we have audio issues.
Sorry.
Okay, there we go. I can hear you now, I think.
Okay. Sorry. So anyway, I guess where did I leave? Where did we lose it?
You were going through the Cantillon effect. You said it's gone through it, a lot of different economies, and
yeah, so a lot of these economies had ended up suffering, well, not necessarily suffering, but facing the cycle that goes through it as this new money flows in. People have access to that money. They start buying foreign imports, diving into luxuries. The money turns off. Everybody falls into poverty after that. And so we saw that happening here in the United States, as we were once the greatest manufacturer of the world. We produced more and sent that out to the world, and then we lent more to the world. And that was like the great American, production that was happening. Well, as we were exporting all this stuff to the world, they were sending us money. That's new money coming in. As we got this new money coming in, our standard of living started to increase. We started to increase our foreign imports coming in. Till eventually we drove out all the domestic manufacturing. We're reliant on foreign imports coming in. And now we're in a position in which that the money turns off. Once the money turns off, we're not a manufacturer anymore. So we're reliant on those foreign productions. If we lose that money, then we all fall into poverty again. So it's almost critical that we keep the central bank that we have in the world reserve currency in place, or else we lose our standard of living, and it will happen eventually.
Yeah. So are you familiar with any of Peter Zion's books? He's
Actually,
geopolitical. Yeah.
To be honest with you, I have one.
Yeah,
right
there
here.
You go. Yeah.
It was just sent to me. So yeah, I do have one.
So now, what do you think about the idea that, some of this, our ability to access a lot of these foreign goods is going to go by the wayside just because of their basic societal collapses due to demographics primarily, and their, cost going up and not being able to basically compete with Mexico for the low end stuff and even us head to head. And his thought, as I understand, is basically that we're going to fragment to a world much more like a pre-World War II world, where everybody kind of has their own little spheres and gets fragmented, and trade amongst each other is not what it has been globally, but it's very limited, but within the individual spheres
Right.
of trade. Some version of the colonial system, but clearly not colonial given the circumstances that we have right now. But but sequestered off, right? So, and that his premise is that America is probably the best positioned to take advantage of it, with our neighbor at the south in Mexico's demographic situation, our own fairly healthy demographic situation based on primarily the millennials, and then the rest of the world's very poor demographic situation that's getting a ton of old people and not many young people, and the young people being the ones that consume, and the older people being that just prior to retirement are the ones that provide the capital into the system. And then as your folks move to retirement up the scale, they start pulling assets out of the system. That's his premise.
To be honest with you, I would have to probably put in a little bit more thought into his theories, into what is going on. Like, I mean, I've heard some of this stuff before, but I haven't really broken it down into a part that, like, I can really take in his theories into like a good explanation, or at least a counterpoint or an agreeing point. I mean, what I see happening right now, especially with like the global manufacturing like slowdown, I mean, you can really see it taking place in China right now. To me, as far as like the idea of that great reset, I could really see something happening here as we slow down and get to a point where, the world manufacturing power has got to the minimum, like as low as it's going to be. Like, we're not producing much. We're like in the worst part we could be in. I think at that point, I think you're going to start finding where the rise of digital currencies and tokenizing of everything will begin to take place, because that's going to be like the position in which that there's going to be the least amount of things to try and reestablish this tokenized world, this digital world. And then from that point on, everything after that will be, like everything that's mined or produced or services, everything will be a tokenized thing. I do see like we're going to go through, and I couldn't tell you how long or when this is going to take place, but I definitely could be in the position in which that I see like a dramatic slowdown, depression worldwide, where it takes years before things start to move and start to reestablish and get going again. Especially if we like have a failure of like the banking system, where you have like credit markets completely frozen and nobody can borrow money and everybody's bank failing, bankruptcies everywhere and stuff like that. I could see where there could be a moment there that they really do a big world shift in transition into a tokenized world, a digital world.
So what's your thoughts of cryptocurrencies?
Like just in general, like just the idea of a cryptocurrency?
Yeah. Well, I mean, in general or specifically, or what? I mean, just what's your position on them? Do you own any? Are you bullish, bearish? Is it just a diversification possibility, or what? I mean,
okay. So I do buy Bitcoin, and I do have some alternative, altcoins out there as well. But I pretty much am heavy into Bitcoin. For a while there, I was dollar cost averaging $50 a week, so very small amounts. Nothing like too major. I like the idea of cryptocurrencies. To be able to enter a transaction into that ledger and hit go, and nobody be able to stop that. You can send value to just about anybody in the world so long as they have an internet connection. That's pretty cool feature. I mean, to be able to transact with anybody in the world without anybody being able to stop you. Not saying that it's secret, like everybody can find those things, but just that capabilities of having that is pretty cool. Like if you have silver, you could do something very similar, but if the person is 100 miles away, how do you get that silver to them, right? With cryptocurrencies, you can do it instantaneously. So I like that idea. And then I also like anything that is outside of government control. If the government can't control it, like even though they can make laws and stuff, like you use it, we're going to kill you or whatever. I mean, they can make up all these laws, but the fact is that they can't stop it. It's like drugs or guns or sex or anything else like that. Once it's produced, once it's out there, they can make up all the laws in the world. There's nothing they can do to actually stop it except for try and do enforcement. So I like that. Like, anything that's outside of the government control, I think is pretty cool. So I'm okay with cryptocurrencies in that sense. I don't buy cryptocurrencies thinking that it's going to make me a millionaire. Like that's not really in my head. And I don't follow the price on a daily move. So I don't really have any intentions on like anything like that as far as investments. I have been following Bitcoin since the Mount Gox days, like when Mount Gox failed, like I was watching that happen. And I have seen so many opportunities where Bitcoin had run up that I just simply wasn't in the game. I was just watching it. And I said, why am I doing that? I mean, if you're going to watch it, get in, right? I mean, stop watching. So I didn't get in with the intent that I'm going to make $1 million off of it. I just got in with the intent that if you are in, then at least you pay a little bit more attention. You have some skin in the game. If it does run up, then cool. You happen to be in the position for it. But that's the way I feel about it. I think that that it's probably like, I don't know if necessarily Bitcoin's going to be it, but there's going to be some sort of digital currency that is going to be used very, very commonly amongst the people. And whether it's a government established one or say something in the lines of Bitcoin, I just feel that that's going to end up happening. People will use it for barter. They'll use it for trade. They'll just go into it. So I'm down. I like cryptocurrencies.
So what's your thoughts on gold and silver commodities, that sort of thing?
I'm into gold. I'm into gold and silver. I'm a big fan of those. But I buy them for insurance policy. I want something in my hand that's outside of that third party. I don't want to be reliant on an app or an envelope or a phone call or anything else like that. When you have metal in your hand, you are the secure. You are the secure of it. You are in charge of it. There's nobody else who is going to be involved. That's pretty cool. Now, I personally had an experience where I was really broke. My car broke down. I had no way to get to work and I had no money, right? And a buddy of mine had a Tahoe for sale. And I called him up and I said, hey, man, you still got that Tahoe? And he said, yeah. And I said, will you take silver and trade? And he said, well, you know it. I said, will you drive it up here? And he says, yeah, I'll be up in a few minutes. So he brings that Tahoe up, the title. I pull out 165 ounces. He signs that title over to me. And I thought, man, that's pretty cool. Right. That is pretty cool. So from that point on, I always looked at silver as my insurance policy. Now, there was a time when I was buying silver thinking that I was going to make a lot of money off of it. Prior to 2011, 2009, 10, I was buying a lot of silver. I was dumping a lot of money into it. And I was jumped on board with guys like Max Kaiser, who were, really pumping, dumping the silver at the time. They had this whole thing that they were pushing out there. Crash JP Morgan, buy silver, $500 an ounce if you want it. All this like horseshit that was going on. But I fell right into it. I'm like, man, quantitative easing, hyperinflation, silver's the way to go. And so I dumped a lot of money into silver and I bought it all the way up to like $40 an ounce. It hit 50. I didn't sell a single bit of it. It trickled all the way back down into the teens. I had never sold a single ounce of it. And now I was well under what I had paid for it. Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, it didn't protect me from inflation. Never once has silver ever done that. Right. Now, I know a lot of people might argue with the idea of precious metals being a safe haven, a protector of inflation or from inflation and stuff. I haven't seen it yet. Right. I thought so, too. I tried to buy into that idea and dumped a lot of money into it, but it never worked out for me. Did it work as an insurance policy? Sure did. Worked out really well for an insurance policy. So I still buy for today, but I buy it for that reason.
Yeah, as a store of value.
As a store of value.
My silver experience, I bought a bunch back in the late 80s. I think I paid $20 an ounce or something. It's below that now, I think. I don't know, So every time I started looking at it, I would hear these, oh, silver's going to get great. And I would go, oh, great. Well, let me look at it. I was like, well, it still ain't even gotten to where I paid the first time I bought silver. So what are these guys talking about, right? And, now I do see the value from an inflation hedge, but that's not a long-term inflation hedge. I think you put it in at a time like now when there is high inflation, and hopefully it'll keep pace with the inflation, just because that's the thing, right? Where is it that you can store value that doesn't get eroded by inflation? That's the key, right? I mean, land maybe, but it seems like maybe that land and property seem to be a bit inflated at the moment. Maybe. I mean, I think maybe gold and silver might even be too. Hard to say, but but what are your options, right? I mean, certainly not some stocks or even a diversified mutual fund or anything like. And clearly, you put it in cash. I mean, even with the raise in interest rate, the Treasury bill, the safest thing in the world, 4%. If inflation's 8 on the record, and that doesn't include food costs and fuel, which are kind of my thing. I've always struggled to try to come up with a basket of goods that could accurately predict inflation. And then I think that's one of the fallacies that people have, is that they think, oh, the inflation number, it's a bunch of really smart people. They have decided what can really indicate what the true cost of inflation is, right? And so here's the number, and that's it. But that's not the reality. And so I've constantly struggled just to try to get an idea to compare, in general, am I really making, sure, my net worth is going up every year, but, the cost of everything is going up too, and that sort of thing. And so the best thing that I've settled on is a basket of goods that are the most importance to me, things that I spend, right? Because that's what's going to affect my life, right? I mean, it doesn't really matter to me, what the cost of, what the cost of dresses are. They could go through the roof. It doesn't matter, because I'm not going to buy it. I don't have a dress, right? Or something, whatever those things are, right? So, so I've kind of gotten that and started, but that's only been a couple of years ago, and started keeping track and comparing that some main items, specific items of food, vehicle, various basket of goods that I've put together to kind of indicate that represent a big percentage of my spending, right? And so it goes through like that. So, but yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of people out there pumping that gold and pumping the deal, and that scares me too. Because they have to have had some influence in the market, and that's artificial influence, right? Seeing some guy from the 70s TV star or 80s TV star telling me to buy gold because it's like protecting him, He didn't do
Well,
that for free.
yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I mean, I was on an interview with some guys who were pumping silver, and I told them straight up, don't do it. I said, what you're doing here, you're gonna end up discrediting yourself, right? If you keep pumping this, like you're doing, right? Because people are gonna fall for this. They're gonna think it's gonna run up to $50, $100 an ounce or whatever, and they're gonna end up getting stuck at that $20 an ounce, thinking that they're gonna make all this money off of it, not buying it for the insurance policy like they should have been doing.
Yep.
And I told them, you're gonna end up pissing a lot of people off. They're gonna look at you, and then they're gonna say, man, I can't trust you anymore. Because that's the way I kind of feel about these things, is that, when I looked around and I started seeing the inflation scenario started taking place, right? And I'm watching, like, I work retail, like I bring in goods all the time. I bring customers up at a counter. I mean, I'm literally like, onesie twosie stuff. That's what I do. And so I had access to thousands of items that I could track the price of, right? And so I would see these customers come in and they would buy, like, I remember this one just really distinctively. He throws down some adhesive, just a little container of adhesive, a little tube of glue, right? And it was kind of fancy epoxy, right? And I zap it and it's like $9.99 or something. He's like, man, this stuff is expensive. I remember paying $5.99 for this stuff. And I'm thinking, yeah, probably. And so I do a history of it, a quick recall, because I can see for years how much we paid. And yeah, it was $5.99 about 5 years ago, right? But 2 years ago, it went up to $7.99, right? Before pandemic hit, right? Now it's up at $9.99. So I'm thinking, well, is it steadily increasing? Was it due to the pandemic? Was it whatever, right? So I see stuff like that happening, and I check out, the idea of, like, is this inflation that's happening on a regular basis, or was this something that just occurred over the pandemic? Other items I've checked, they didn't move at all, right? Customers will say, man, these prices have gone up, but it hasn't moved. They just convinced themselves. And then other items, they went down. Like something really simple, like this really kind of lame, like a stove damper. It's just a little disc that sits inside the pipe of a wood stove so that you can control the heat a little bit, the flow of air. So this little stupid damper thing, right? We were selling for like $12.50 or something like that. Well, they came in, last time they came in, they were $9.99. They dropped like a lot, and people don't even anticipate that happening. So it's not exactly inflation that is running across the board over all items equally, right? It lands in some areas very dramatically, in other areas it barely touches at all. 15-pound felt, it's been $32 a roll for as long as I could think of, and right now it's at 35. So it went up a little bit. These are the things that I follow. Lumber was a great example. Everybody pointed at lumber, talking about the inflation scenario. It ran up to $1,700 per thousand, and everybody was like, money printer go burr, prices go up. Look at lumber right there. Well, right now it's at $450 per thousand, which is the price that we were selling lumber, which lumber futures were selling for back in 2017, 18, right? Way before the pandemic. So where did all the inflation go, right? Now, granted, there are a lot of places within the industries out there that are still broken down, right? I mean, obviously, food and fuel is the number one thing that everybody spends their money on. So unless those two go down, nobody's going to experience any kind of drop in inflation until the food and fuel come out, right? Everything else could drop dramatically. Nobody would notice.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll be honest with you. I blame. Then obviously there's some structural pieces back in '08 that there was a house of cards being built. Okay, but if there had been no wind, that a house of cards can stand forever. Well, the wind to me was the sharp increase in gas prices, fuel prices is what blew that house of cards down, and just because, I mean, to me, that's the most critical item. But of course, it's constantly volatile all the time, right? And so, with that volatility going up and all the time, it's not something that, makes for a good measurable mark over time. But it is so impactful. I mean, it's a percentage of every single good that you have. I mean,
the cost of fuel and energy going into it. Yes, absolutely.
Fuel, I mean, how much is it? I would be surprised if it's not maybe in totality. If not, it's a very significant. If it's not the single largest individual cost in lumber alone.
Fuel, energy.
Yeah, because I mean, somebody's got to go out there and cut it. Somebody's got to go out there and deal with it. They got to ship it out to where you're at. I mean, well, for sure, it's a difference in the cost of lumber from you to me down in Texas, right? So, I mean, if not, it's certainly a significant part of it, right? And it impacts. And it's certainly a big part of food costs. I mean, the transportation, the production, all of that is intertwined, tremendously.
Yeah, I could definitely see where the energy costs going into the lumber industry could be probably the major component of it. I mean, you think about it. I mean, it's fiber, so it's heavy, right? There's nothing inside of that distribution network that doesn't require like major equipment and trucks and rails and mills, and like everything about it is expensive and heavy and and all about it. So yeah, I could really see where it would be the input costs that go into it, which really kind of makes me start to question that 450 per thousand right now, and the input cost being as high as it is. If you were to take out the recent input cost, the rise in input costs going into it, where would lumber really be at right now?
Yeah.
I mean, has it crashed like dramatically? Should it be at like 250 per thousand?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, we could be really facing a much bigger crash in lumber prices than people would actually know because of that right there, because of that added input cost going into it. So it's definitely some strange times. I'm noticing a lumber shortage starting to take place right now.
That's what I was hearing on your last couple of videos.
Yeah. And it started with some pressure treated a couple of weeks ago, and I thought, well, maybe it's just a little isolated thing that's happening. But then, I was talking with the buyer, and he was like, "No, man, I'm having trouble getting 2x6/16s, getting trouble getting these, a couple of other stuff." And I'm thinking, here it comes, man. That was the exact same story that I heard 2 years ago before we had, the major lumber shortage happening. With the mills up there in Canada right now. I mean, Canfor said that they were going to shut down their mills until the new year. I mean, that's a lot of material that they are not going to be producing. So it's going to be a tight inventory level probably by the end of the year. And I can't imagine prices staying down. I think that they're probably going to jump up right in the middle of winter when nobody would expect them to.
So what percentage do you think of demand is from, say, construction, building, for, say, lumber?
Probably the majority of it.
But would it be like 90, or would it be like 70 or 60, or what would you think?
I think
it's obviously not holding you to anything. I mean,
that's probably going to be a very difficult question to ask. Like, I would probably have to think about it for a little bit and really like kind of see how like the condition of our yard, how we do things. Because there comes time like, it's kind of funny. During the pandemic, almost everything that went out of the yard was going commercial. Like it was going to residential housing, construction, something of that nature. No retail. Like retail died. So when the lumber, I mean, there was nobody. When lumber went to $13.50, like a 2x4 went from $3 to $13.
Yeah,
the walk-in customer, unless they absolutely had to buy it for a repair or something like that, just was not coming in. There was no projects happening.
Yeah, we're not putting in a deck right now, honey. Not with these costs.
No, not at all. And so a lot of contractors, though, I mean, this is their livelihood. If they're not building, they're not earning money, right? So even though the lumber prices were extremely high, that was an inelastic demand. They have to go out there and buy it. So I would say during that time, it was probably well over 90% was going to like the commercial side of things, like, residential building, contractor purchasing kind of stuff. But right now, I have a lot of retail coming through. Right. And I think a lot of that has to do with what I was calling project delaying fatigue. Like they want their deck. They really want one, but they're tired of then they're like, okay, that's it. I'm done. Whatever the price is, I'm buying it now. And so I see that happening a lot. Like they're not even really like trying to find out whether or not it's a good price comparatively to what it was. What's the bottom line? $2,300. Okay, I'll take it, and they're good with it. So it's starting to happen now that I think a lot more retail is coming into the market just to try and, start doing some of the projects that they've been postponing. So,
yeah. Well, sometimes I'm, when you talk about overall inflation, because I've gone back and I've looked at, in various commodities, whether it be corn, cotton, lumber, you name it. And there have been other spikes in most all of them, at other times, and almost to the single commodity, we have not been at the highest ever. There's a few that we were, but there were other points in time when things were higher than they are now. However, what I did notice is those times weren't all the same.
Right.
So it was like, lumber was high in 82 or something, but corn was high, it was low in 82, but high in winter. But what really I think gives the impression of just this huge issue is that all of these things kind of hit peaks of some sort all at the same time, right? It
Yeah.
wasn't just a spike in lumber, it wasn't just a spike in cotton, it wasn't just a spike in all these things. It was all of them at once. And I know printing a ton of money, and getting it directly into a bunch of people's hands, obviously spurred that. I mean, what we printed a third more currency than we ever had. Obviously, that has some impact, but it's not it's not the only situation that I feel like there's a lot of. It's not as simplistic as just that, right?
It's not, right? And that's where, like, following the lumber story as closely as I did,
Mhm.
it really told me the story about what was happening with the prices and inflation. Because I don't know how many people were on my channel saying, dude, you got it wrong. Money printer go burr, lumber prices go up. What else do you need to know? Now, if it hadn't been for the fact that I was doing lumber videos every week
Mhm.
for a year and a half before the lumber prices shot up, that
Mhm.
I probably would not have been as acutely aware of the mill curtailments and inventory depletions that had been
Mhm.
taking place, except that I was looking for that information to put out for my videos
Mhm.
because there was so much of it, in my opinion, taking place at the time that nobody was looking at. I mean, I was talking about mill curtailments and shutdowns up at 100 Mile up in British Columbia area, and it was a sad story up there. I mean, there was, generations of people who lost their livelihoods and they had nothing to go to.
Yeah.
So when I was watching this lumber inventory depletion taking place, and then pandemic kicks in, mills get shut down, even more inventory depletion, and then those stimulus checks came out and they wiped out what little inventory was there with that
Mhm.
stimulus check. So a lot of people, when they saw that stimulus check come out there and they wiped out that inventory with it, and the prices shot up because supply and demand. If there's no
Mhm.
supply and demand's there, it doesn't matter. Even if you have a little bit of demand and no supply, the prices go up through the roof. Well, that's what we had experienced. It was at the exact same time that they're printing up all this money. And so while I'm saying this is a supply chain breakdown and inventory depletion, all these mills shut down, there was huge, like, OSB manufacturing pulling like billions of square foot of production off the market. And this is all prior to the pandemic. So when I was like, no, we haven't really had a chance for the money printer to go burr to cause these prices to go up. I mean, it has happened, but it's just started. This is a supply chain breakdown. What are you all going to say when the prices come back down to 400 per thousand again? Right.
Mhm.
So, in my opinion, although there was that stimulus check that really did do a number for wiping out the inventory, it was all that inventory depletion that had been taking place, plus the mill curtailment that had taken place during the pandemic shutdown, that had really wiped out the inventory. And that lack of inventory is what drove the prices up as high as they are. And we can see it now because, prices at 400 per thousand. I mean, it's like back to normal again.
Mhm.
So is this the exact same case for all the items in the? No, of course not. I mean, the economy, obviously got juiced with a lot of money printing. When that interest rate dropped as low as it did, people were diving into cars and houses
Mhm.
and, spending this money like drunken sailors. They didn't really care how much they were spending on this stuff. Like, you know, paying $100,000 more for a house. Who cares? Let's do it. Like, they had this attitude. I didn't like. I mean, I couldn't even understand it. Like, why would people go off and pay so much more over the manufacturer's suggested retail price for a car? I mean, I drive a $500 car. I'm cool with it,
Yeah.
right? I mean, sure, I like to drive a nice car, but I'm sure as hell I ain't going to pay thousands of dollars over a manufacturer's suggested retail price car. I mean, none of that made sense. So the attitude of the people within themselves really started driving up that inflation, as well as they were just willing to spend higher price, spend that money on higher price goods. And so the expectation alone started driving up a lot of the inflation as well. So yeah, I mean, I get it. Money printer go burr, prices go up, but there was stuff
Yeah.
happening, you know?
Well, and I think one of the things that doesn't get mentioned a lot, that I think was a big cause of it as well, is people had time off. I mean, yeah, they might have been working remote, but come on. I mean, people still haven't gotten up to the level of production in a lot of cases that they were at pre-pandemic. So, I mean, a lot of people had time off, or at least far more flexible time to do these projects, invest in these things and that sort of thing. And they had a lot more time, with their significant other and their kids, and a lot of things that might have been issues around the house that, if you only have to deal with it for, an hour in the evening, whatever it is, it's not as big a problem as if you're, stumbling across it, I mean, a screwed up doorknob, right? I mean, that's not a big deal if you only have to deal with it once a day or maybe once a week. But if you're dealing with this thing 2, 3, 4, 5 times a day, we need to go just get a knob, and I don't care what it costs, right? Or whatever the situation. And there are lots of little things like that played into it. It was a hopefully an extremely unique time we'll never have to repeat. But it certainly it's just the ripples of that are just still going out there. And I don't know when it's going to stop, that we don't,
It's
that
going
there
to take a
aren't
while.
ripples,
Yeah. I mean,
I mean, they're
it's going to take,
dissipating, of course, but those ripples are still in there. They're still coming
it's
along.
going to take, it's going to take years, because it's the bullwhip effect where you go from undersupply to oversupply to undersupply. And that's going to take a while to figure out until it finally lands in its equilibrium. I think lumber will probably do it first, just because lumber is such a well-established supply chain, industry. It's mostly, I mean, pretty much all of it is a domestic manufacturer here in the Canada, United States.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I could see where lumber will find its equilibrium fairly quickly comparatively to a lot of other things in the economy. Like I couldn't tell you, like what the Peloton or stationary bikes or something like that. I mean, like those guys kind of screw their business model up. But it's like I couldn't tell you how long those things are gonna take, but it's just that's the case, is that when you have this huge stimulus that happened, right, and this huge demand that all happened, and the lack of inventory, all of a sudden you have these orders that start flowing through the system, getting to the manufacturers that say, hey, there is a lot of demand for this stuff. We need to start producing a lot of crap. So they start expanding their production facilities, right? You really saw it happen here in the United States when it came to the masks, the surgical masks. So we didn't have a fairly decent domestic manufacturing supply, right? We are getting most of these surgical masks from China. So when the supply came from China got cut off, we were lacking these surgical masks. Everybody's going to die if they don't have them. So the ramping up of production of these surgical masks here in the United States really kicked into gear. Well, now the issue is that the mask mandates have come to an end. The only people who really buy masks are hospitals, and they're buying the cheapest ones from China. Now the local manufacturers of masks here in the United States have expanded their company, and they can't afford it anymore. Now they're going to go bankrupt. And that's the same thing that's going to happen with a lot of industries that tried to bring back their manufacturing to the United States, is that they're going to find that the foreign competition is going to be too much for them, and they won't be able to compete without subsidies or tariffs or something,
Right. So let me shift gears on that. Now, you went, did I read somewhere that or heard somewhere that you went to Houston for something called the Rebel Capitalist event?
Yeah.
Tell me about that. What is that, and what part did you play? And
that was a lot of fun. So the Rebel Capitalist, this is George Gammon's economic convention, conference. And so he invites speakers from all over who are in the game. And I was one of the speakers that he had invited to the Houston trip. And there were some pretty big names there. I mean, not just, some of the awesome economists that, we see on YouTube all the time, like Mark Moss and Lynn Alden. There was quite a few guys there, Jason Hartman. But then there was also some pretty big names like Robert Kiyosaki. He was there, and Ron Paul was the keynote speaker.
Ah,
So, and yeah, so George invited me to come down to the Rebel Capitalist and speak on my insights into the lumber industry, and some of my thoughts on that. One of the most amazing experiences that I've ever had. I have never been up in front of a crowd of that size before. Now I have done I did a little bit of theater, so I've been in front of a group of an audience, and I do some bingo announcing at a local tavern. So occasionally I'll have people up 50, 60 people in the bar at times, but never have I been on stage for an hour speaking to a group of 700 people by myself. That was something all new to me. And what an experience. I mean, after I had gone down there and met all the wonderful people, that was another thing. Like, I went down there with no idea that I had this celebrity status thing going. Like, to me, I mean, I could walk through my town all day long. I might get somebody who waves at me or
nobody
something, but
cares.
nobody's going to be like, oh, dude, it's so nice to meet you. Like that to me was like, I'm looking at my wife and I'm like, we can see this, it was like, I mean, but I met so many awesome people down there. Some of the fans, people who are just meeting me for the first time or saw the conference and saw me speak, and they were like, "Hey, I really, really enjoyed your talk." So that was a really cool event. And then I actually went to the Rebel Capitalist 3 in Miami just to hang out. And George invited me again to come up and speak on stage for the on a panel to talk about the real estate market, and then again my input from the lumber industry side of things. So that was pretty cool. The Rebel Capitalist is a great event. I encourage anybody who's really into learning about economics or trying to figure out the whole macro thing. The group of people that George puts together to attend and speak at that conference is just absolutely amazing. I mean, it's a very powerful event, and I really encourage people to go check it out. It's a little expensive, but it's well worth every dime.
Cool. What do you think doesn't get enough attention that out there in the news or whatever? What things?
I think probably, as far as not getting enough attention, I think that the conducting of the monetary policy and the actual strategy in which the Fed uses, I think, is not appropriately presented out there. A lot of the theories that are presented out there are left over from the last 10, 20 years of the Federal Reserve and their behaviors. People are conditioned to that and are expecting that from the Federal Reserve. So I don't think that they are quite aware of what it is that the Federal Reserve is attempting to do. And I think the Fed is allowing that to continue. It's something I was saying earlier on it. So to me, the idea of average inflation rate is not getting nearly enough attention. The idea that the Federal Reserve had put out the speeches and information way ahead of time, saying that they needed a condition very similar to what we are experiencing right now. I don't think enough people are paying attention to that, to saying, hey, look, the Federal Reserve was asking for this exact thing to be happening. So I think there's a lot of exposure that could happen from the Federal Reserve that is just not, this is not happening. Just the idea that people are blaming Jerome Powell, like Powell did this and Powell did that and Powell's Fed and Powell, and I'm like, he's a spokesperson. He doesn't do anything except for talk for the Federal Open Market Committee. There's 12 people out there who are voting for this monetary policy, and each one of them, you have to understand where their position is on things if you really want to know where monetary policy is going to go. So to blame Powell, like when all this narrative is out there, all these mainstream articles are pointing the finger at Powell, that's the wrong direction. That's not where it needs to go. It needs to be pointed at the FOMC. People need to understand who they are and what they are voting for. If that was the case, I think people would probably understand the monetary policy a little bit better than what is happening now, because really it's all about inflation expectations. It's about, making sure that people believe that it's actually happening, and because if they believe it, then they will condition themselves to do it,
And then that's the market.
And that's the market. Yeah. And that's straight up. You know, just like the idea that, a lot of economists were coming out saying that the Federal Reserve has lost control, that the markets were reacting before the Federal Reserve lifting of interest rates. Again, they're missing it. It was jawboning. They said it straight up. We are going to be lifting interest rates 3/4 of a point here in the next quarter, right? Markets took that information seriously and they started conditioning themselves for it. So the markets were behaving ahead of the Federal Reserve, but it wasn't ahead of the Federal Reserve. They're reacting off of their words. And so the Federal Reserve started their monetary policy the moment that they said that they were going to raise rates before they even did anything.
Oh yeah, for sure. And that, I mean, that goes back to probably, I don't know if you're old enough to remember, but Greenspan was probably the king of just, I mean, he would say, somebody would catch him at like coming out of a restaurant and it would change the stock market, and he would just say hi. And it was, they'd spend, hours dissecting the tone. Did he seem like it was a high, an interest rate increase high, or was that an interest rate decrease high? And, everybody would spin out, back then. Of course, he was a unique figure, I think, in Federal Reserve chairman. I don't think we've had another one. We certainly haven't had one since him like him, that probably demanded that much attention and that much power, and how subtle he could move and, and shift markets back then. They're having to be a little more forceful nowadays.
Yeah, he was not very clear in his words. In fact, he liked that. He made light of that, saying that if you understood what I said, you probably misunderstood me. And like he liked being confusing and stuff. So
well, and he would just insinuate until he got what he wanted,
Right.
I mean, well, and it, it seemed to work at the time. So
and it's surprising. Like if you go back and read a lot of Alan Greenspan stuff from the 70s, that dude was a huge gold bug. I mean, huge gold bug. He did not like the idea of a central bank fiat currency and stuff like that. So it's really odd to find him as a central bank, like being the chairman of the Federal Reserve, just whatever 15 years later of it, after he was making all these gold bug predictions and stuff like that. And so it really, like, I don't know if you follow Bix Weir or anything. Like he has this theory, this road to Ruta theory. I don't know if he's still going with it. He did a few years ago. Excellent theory behind it, how they were going to go onto a fiat currency and then eventually transition over to another gold currency again. And he has this whole theory behind it, and it's called Road to Ruta. And it's pretty good. I really enjoy his theory and how he puts that whole thing together. And he uses Alan Greenspan as like the person who was like setting this up, that we're going to go over to a fiat currency and eventually switch back over to a gold standard after, I don't know, I think after we created a one world currency or something like that. And anyway, he had like this whole plan thing set up for it, but it was pretty good, I thought.
Well, if you look at Greenspan's age, a big part of his early developmental years, we were on at least a limited gold standard. It was illegal to own gold there for a while, and so you could see that kind of coming out of that as his as his basis, that probably when he was educated, went through college and what have you, and then he's early in his career, that's kind of what we had. He saw the problem with it, but then he probably had the foresight to see some of the problems with getting off of it, and that makes a lot of sense that that he would maybe want to move us back to something like that. But obviously, he didn't. And he's only one guy. So, as much power he wielded, he was still just one guy.
And we don't know how long the plan is for. I mean, he may have to hand the ball off in order to make it, in order for it to progress. I mean, I don't know. It seems with the rise of central bank digital currencies, I just don't really see like the gold standard coming back into play.
I just don't know that it's, and I don't know that we want that. I mean, I know there's a lot of people out there saying that's what we need to do, but then you're just trading off for, I mean, it's still not, you look at the volatility of gold, for instance. I mean, the only way they did it before, you couldn't own gold, right? So, I mean, that's how it worked, because the country owned all the gold. So, you didn't have any gold, but yet there's still production of gold that, can influence you. The limited amount of production is probably the most, because something tells me we're not going to expand gold reserve, production to meet our, liquidity needs. And that was one of the problems we ran into before, right? So,
Yep.
I mean, you're still going to have that issue, but then, you hear all these theories, a hybrid version of this and all of that and that sort of thing. And, I know everybody says that, fiat currency is not backed up by anything. Well, most fiat currencies aren't, but I do believe that the American dollar is backed up by 10 super carriers.
Yeah, I mean, basically the dollar is shipping channels.
Yeah,
I mean, is what it really comes down to.
Controlling the world and having, literally having the ability to go into the world and physically take whatever you might want. Now, I'm not advocating that. I'm not saying that we should do that. I don't think we should have none of that. But the reality is, 100 years ago, that's what happened.
Yeah.
Maybe 150, let's say. Yeah. That's what people did, to solve a lot of these problems.
One of the issues that I don't know if a lot of people who are advocating for going back to a gold standard quite realize or are prepared for is that you're going to have to be prepared and ready for the business cycles, meaning that there's going to be concentrations of wealth into particular areas, and then that will collapse. That wealth will get redistributed, and then it will reconcentrate again into another spot. That's the way it goes. And people get very frustrated with that as they watch these people rise to power and then all of a sudden quickly go to, other people just go to rags, immediately. And, well, that's the cycle. That's the business cycle that happens. And it's the flow of money that does that. And that's really where I think that the Federal Reserve was attempting to keep it from happening, right? They didn't want, people were complaining that they get hurt by these business cycles. And so they were going to try and ease people through these business cycles. If we go back to a gold standard, we're going to experience those things again, where, recessions come quickly and they're deep and they're short. The rise of business, to be able to start a business and make money at it, will be very easy and strong during the good times and collapse dramatically during the bad times. I mean,
impossible.
So, it's a good thing, in my opinion. You can certainly concentrate your wealth into gold and then have a stable currency so that for years down the road, whatever you bought today, you'll still be able to buy down the road. That kind of thing will occur. So you'll have a stable savings, but you will have a dramatic business cycle.
Yep, I would concur with that. What do you think, things out there, how do you think you're maybe misunderstood?
Me personally, I think I done it to myself. As far as this channel goes, because I have gone so far to try and create conversations or start conversations, to try and play like the devil's advocate almost, to bring up certain ideas or concepts so that, we can have a discussion on it, that a lot of people end up thinking that they know how I believe or how I feel about things. And they don't. I think people who have followed me for a long time probably get it, but maybe somebody who's new to the channel or only watched a couple of videos, they hear me talk about the Fed. I disagree with something about, somebody's inflation scenario or something like that. And then they think, well, you're a supporter of the Fed. You think the Fed should exist. You think, and then then they think I have all these political views and stuff, and it just starts snowballing from there. I don't necessarily correct them on a lot of stuff. Sometimes I do, but not always do I correct it. So I think that's probably where I'm misunderstood, is that they think that I believe in certain ways that I really don't, where I'm actually just trying to start a conversation.
And from the looks of your comments and the sheer number of them for your videos and ratio probably to views, I didn't do the numbers, but it looks like you do a really good job of stirring that conversation up within the at least in the chat, as I'm going back through looking at it, or the comments, I guess, maybe not a chat, but
and that was that was an attempt to, because when I first started trying to build the channel up, I was trying to come up with all these ideas on what it is that I needed to do. And so I'm taking other people's information, or at least their ideas. And one of the things, they were like, always ask everybody to like and subscribe, right? And I'm like, I am never going to do that. I am not going to ask for anybody to like and subscribe. For one, I want them to like the video if they truly like it, and then I know I'm doing a good job. And if they don't like it, I want them to say so I know that I'm doing a bad job with it. So I never ask anybody to like or subscribe. I figure if they like it, they'll just do it.
Yeah.
But then they said to ask questions so that people could answer them, right? And I thought that's a really good way to get people to comment, is to ask them a question in there. And so that's where I came up with the "you let me know" at the end of it, is to just try and encourage them. Go ahead and say something about the video. And so that's what I did to try and get those comments, is that I put that at the end of it, is that "you let me know" kind of, and then it became my slogan, you know? So I didn't, but that was the whole idea behind the whole "you let me know," was just to try and get somebody to put a comment, you know, on the video. And it worked. I mean, it worked pretty good.
I think it worked great. I mean, the appearances, everything. What's been the most challenging thing about podcasting for you?
I would say probably the most challenging thing is other than just like making sure that I come up with a video every single day, or at least every other day, being consistent with it. So outside of the consistency of it, I think my biggest challenge right now is that it's not enough of me to be active on more platforms, to be able to put out more content for other things. So I feel that like right now, I kind of limited myself. Having a day job and trying to do this at the same time, it just kind of got me to a point where I feel that I could be doing a lot more. I just don't have the time anymore. If I take away from my family or something else, then I'm going to start causing issues someplace else. So I feel like that's probably like my biggest thing right now, is that there's not enough of me, or I just don't have enough time to really do this the way I would like to do it, you know. So that might still happen yet, you know. I mean, I might have to, find that time to make it happen. One of the things that I would really like to start doing is those speaking engagements. I had a lot of fun at the Rebel Capitalist, and I think it would be a lot of fun to maybe do little small mini Rebel Capitalist kind of things, maybe just a small conference in my area, or maybe even at like the local taverns or something like that. Just, get a group of people to sit around and, do a little discussion, or something like that. I think that would be a lot of fun. So,
that's interesting. So, I understand you don't read a lot of books, but so what's kind of the main source of your information? Is it YouTube videos? Is it podcasts? Is it, website reading? What?
So, I get some articles, some pretty decent stuff get emailed to me from viewers. They're like, "Hey, I saw this article, thought of you, thought you might like it." So I get some information coming to me that way. Google is probably my favorite source. I love using Google, and my news feed is full of really good stuff. And I don't follow anyone. Like, I don't just go to like any particular website to get the information off of it. What I do is I will scroll lots and lots of headlines, and I will pick out like articles that I want to read, and I will save those articles. And so I'll, like, say in the morning over a cup of coffee, I will find 6 articles and I don't care where they come from. I'll just find 6 articles, and I will read those articles. Once I have read the information and thought, okay, this is pretty good, then I'll go and see like where it came from. Like, a lot of times I don't even know who it is that wrote the article. I'm just reading the information off of it. And so that's how I kind of get some information, just kind of shotgunning it through Google. Other things I will hear, like somebody will bring up a particular topic. I will go and find 3 articles that talk differently about that particular topic. Like, I will try and research those ones out. And again, I don't care where they come from, so long as they have different views. And then I will read it that way. When it comes to monetary policy and information like that, hardcore Federal Reserve information, straight to the Fed speeches and all their stuff that they got going on. I learned more about monetary policy trying to break down the Fed speeches than anybody, any economist, any politician out there. They do not speak that stuff correctly. They will confuse the hell out of you. if you're not following the Fed's words themselves. Those speeches are very difficult to get through because they're confusing as hell. But once you do get through them, that's where the good information is. Um, I mean, I was able to predict a lot of the stuff that the Federal Reserve was going to do, especially with the average inflation stuff, all coming from their speeches. I mean, it's not me coming up with it. It's just repeating the stuff that they said,
Right. So what's been the most impactful recently? Would you say the Fed stuff, or is there something recently that's maybe been a little more impactful?
The more I learn about economics is that politicians and people react to the economy, right? The economy doesn't react to them, right? So everything that we're experiencing, the wars, the debts, the outrageous spendings, all that other stuff that's going on, those people are reacting to the economy itself. So, I'm sorry, what was the question again?
Yeah, what was the most impactful thing recently?
Right. And so when it comes to impactful things that are happening, I mean, like you can have the war, like, the Russia-Ukraine war, you can have the pandemic, you can have that stuff, but really what the impactful part of things is going to be the people's perception of what is happening. I mean, that's it. Like you as the person making the decision, like, for what you're going to do with your money, that's really the most impactful part of it. They had to convince everybody, right? They had to convince everybody that there was a problem and that they needed to do something about it. And so when you have something like this pandemic, and then you have the unusual and exigent circumstance that comes from that, that was pretty impactful, right? Those are things that would never have existed in any kind of normal time. There is no strategist out there in the world who would have taken the unusual and exigent circumstances that gave the Fed powers that nobody knew about, right? I mean, nobody saw that coming. You couldn't have, right? So that was pretty impactful. Those secrets, the Fed knew about that. They knew they had those tools ahead of time. We didn't know about that stuff. And I imagine some politicians knew about it, but we didn't.
Right.
So yeah, that's the kind of stuff that I find to be impactful. Is those secret tools that they have that nobody knows about. Yeah.
So what's been your highlight of the last year? What's been most exciting?
For me personally?
Yeah.
So I guess probably going to the Rebel Capitalist, that was pretty big thing for me. That was a pretty big event. And then also just personally, like I have really come out of what I feel was a pretty dark spot in my life, and coming into something that I never thought I would ever have. Like, never did I ever think that I would be like a real YouTuber. Like, I mean, I even have a hard time even understanding that,
Yeah, or some crazy guy from Waco beg you to just shoot a video, right?
Right. Well, and this is the amazing thing that's happening is that, now I'm meeting and talking with people all over, and I there was a time that nobody would even give me a time of day, like they didn't give a shit about me, and so like I think a lot of it to me, like I gave up drinking about almost 7 years ago now, and that was a big thing in my life. I didn't notice it at the time, because like, when you give up drinking, then all of a sudden you realize that, man, my life sucks, right? Like I got a bunch of mental issues, I'm broke, I got all kinds of stuff going on, and I've been covering it up with this alcohol. All right, we got to figure this out.
None of my friends want to have anything to do with me.
Right? Yeah. Now my friends don't want to hang out with me neither because I don't drink beer anymore. So like, so all this stuff kind of happened to me, and so I started going through a lot of transition. Just trying to figure out who it was that just trying to figure myself out, and then having this channel, that was November of 2017. Like I said, I was pretty broke at the time, but all of a sudden, like this channel is getting attention, right? People are like, hey man, you're doing a good job here. Keep it up. Yeah. And I'm thinking, wow, like, oh, okay. Yeah. Like I'll do this, man. I'll do this. And so as I started doing it, I realized, man, this is a pretty worthy goal. Like this is like, I want to have a real channel that pays me, that I can engage in conversation with. And this thing is really happening. Like this is like a real worthy goal. And then I realized if you have a worthy goal in your life, everything in your life really starts to get better. Like, all of a sudden, people are engaging with you in a more positive manner, like it just, everything just starts happening in a better fashion. And so I realized having a worthy goal in your life is really probably the most important thing ever. Like, it doesn't have to be the pursuit of money, just something that's worthy, like even volunteering would probably do it, and that changed my life. That changed everything about the way I was viewing life, the way I was conducting myself. And then once like you're out of debt and then you have a little bit of savings, well, then next thing you know, like the world doesn't seem so stressful anymore. And,
Right.
so that's been pretty good for me. I mean, it's been like, I've changed, like, I've become a better person, I think, over the last year. I don't know how to say it. Like, I mean, I'm a nice person. I've always been a nice person, but something inside of me is growing better.
Well, I mean, you probably shed a lot of the issues that were preoccupying your
Yeah.
mind. I mean, debt, the debt itself is an issue, but just the mental, not just the financial, but the mental strain of dealing with it. I think a lot of people don't know because they've never had a chance to get out of it and
Yeah.
see what the difference is. To have been in it and then get out of it, is the cycle you have to go through to really kind of understand and appreciate that
Yeah.
cycle. That's for
Yeah.
sure.
Um, Not to cut you, I have about 5% left on my battery, so I don't want
Yeah,
to
well, I was going
lose
to
it.
tell you, you've been very gracious with your time, and
Yeah,
I
no
certainly
problem.
appreciate it, man. And man, love to hook up with you again and talk about something, particularly if there's anything interesting in the news that we could discuss. I really have enjoyed engaging with you. It's been great, man.
Oh, absolutely, man. I love these conversations like this, and this has been an excellent one. I mean, I had a really good time tonight. So, yeah, I mean, if you want to make it a, every other week or a monthly thing or something like that, just send me an email and we'll do it, man.
Yeah.
Anytime.
Yeah, that sounds cool, man. We might do it. I really appreciate it. And anyway, I'm gonna let you get back to your family. It's just still, I don't know why it still amazes me that like it's dark outside here and like you guys, still have light. I don't know. It's kind of weird. Yeah, but I
Yeah,
mean, it's pitch dark here, and you're on the other side of the coast. Technology. I mean, of course, I'm 50 something years old, so the world didn't used to be like this, where I could just interface with somebody on
right.
the
Yeah,
other side of the world. But that still just amazes me. So I'm gonna have to cut all this craziness out of me showing how old I am at the end of the video. So, all right, man. Well, I'm gonna let you get back to it. I
cool.
appreciate it. Thanks a
Not a
lot.
problem.
All
Yeah, you're
right.
welcome, man. We'll
All
talk
right.
to you later.
Bye.
Bye.